It's a business basic. Before you can make money, you must figure out the most effective way to spend it. So today we're digging into the details of creating an effective budget with Jeff Haydock, President and CEO of EcoCFO, the only CFO for hire consulting firm dedicated to the energy and environmental industry. Jeff, you ready to get going on these questions?
Absolutely.
All right. So the first one. Now, I've heard a budget referred to as a business roadmap. We know why we need a roadmap for driving in unfamiliar areas, but what makes a budget so critical for businesses?
Well, this is a long list, so I will try and keep it to a few main points here. But first and foremost, if there is no established budget for a business, then there's a behavioral issue with the way money is spent. People, employees, managers, whoever, they'll just spend money until somebody tells them not to. And it's really difficult to control that when you don't have a sense for what particular line items within your the budget that should exist. It's really tough to control how money is being spent if you don't know going into the year, what you need to spend money on. So if you create a budget and enforce it properly, then you will immediately create a level of accountability across the business to limiting wasteful spending. Secondly, I would say that it's a great exercise to go through because it requires you to look, 6 to 12 months into the future to really get a feel for how you envision how you are going to be spending money to accomplish some of the goals that you've set for the business. As you've set sales goals, but you've got to be asking yourself, what resources will I need to achieve those sales goals? And this is one particular way to think about, okay, well, I'll need 1 or 2 extra outside salespeople. I'll need an inside sales rep. I'm going to need a new CRM system. I'm going to need, a car for my salespeople to drive around in. So it forces you to think about how you're going to need to invest in the business to accomplish some of the goals that you've set. Third, I'd say, this is, great for the financial folks is that it's great to be able to track your actual expenses month after month. But what's even better is being able to compare that to your budgeted expenses that you had going into the month. This sort of will help you fine tune and dial in your own ability to budget for this business. It'll give you a better feel for how you thought you were going to spend money versus how you really did spend money. And this exercise alone will create a conversation to be had around, well, what changed from what we thought was going to happen to what actually happened, and how can we do a better job in the future of seeing those things coming? It'll give you as you use the word roadmap, and I'll use that here too, but it'll give you a roadmap to make adjustments as necessary if you start missing sales targets. Because if you start missing sales targets, then the impact that will have on cash flow will obviously be a depressant on cash flow. But if you have a map in place, or at least some form of a plan to figure out how to adjust to that, then you can make adjustments more quickly so that it doesn't crush your cash flow for months moving forward. It allows you to really pick up on these shortfalls or variations in projections quicker so that you can respond faster and mitigate the impact that those negative variations might have. This one is also, it's kind of even a little bit less of a financial reason that I love to have budgets in place, is because it empowers your employees and your managers to make purchasing decisions without having to go all the way to the top to get approval every time they want to buy, they need to spend a few $100 on office expenses, or they want to go buy, some new equipment for the office or what have you, or, if a marketing department wants to spend some money on printing or wants to revise some work on the website or wants to hire an independent consultant to do some work for them. This is a great way to let them know ahead of time, look, this is your budget for the year. And if quite frankly, if I'm a good manager and a good owner, then I will have involved all of my mid-level managers or department heads in the budgeting process to allow them to basically build their own budget for the year so that they know what they can spend money on and they don't have to come to me every time they want to do it. And then that saves me a whole bunch of time from having to review, expense requests and all that sorts of things like that. So it's a great time saver for the people at the top as well, and it gives your employees a greater feel of autonomy and responsibility, which is good for them.
Okay. So obviously, I mean, those are a lot of great benefits, especially as they're related to planning for the future. But if it is so beneficial to have a budget, what's preventing companies from planning and maintaining budgets? Because it's obviously a pretty big issue in the business world.
Yeah, so if you've got a business owner, particularly in small businesses, if you have a business owner that just is not a financial pro, then this exercise can be a little intimidating to go through, just because if you've never done it before, then how do I even start? Where do I even begin? So sometimes just getting started is the most difficult task for some folks. So I'd say that's one particular reason that is relatively easy to fix, is to just get over that intimidation factor. That sort of parlays into this idea that they may not have a great understanding of effective methodologies to perform a budgeting exercise. So getting a little bit of training on how to do this effectively will, I think, alleviate some of those concerns, and usually does. And maybe having somebody help you with it the first couple of times is great, and then you're off and running, and you can pretty much do it on your own. Is a lot of, I don't know, maybe not a lot, but many things that happen in businesses are, if new initiatives come down from the top and management has a history of not really enforcing these new things that they want to try and do, then a lot of times it just seems to be, there's no backbone there. This is just the newest fad that management wants to try. So we're not really going to take it seriously. And this might be similar in that if you don't enforce a budget that you've set, then it's pretty much useless, and everybody's going to look at it that way. So you can't just build a budget for the sake of building a budget. You need to monitor it monthly and make changes and enforce spending limits on folks, especially if they've taken part in establishing their own budgets, because if they can't adhere to the budgets that they set for themselves, then maybe there's a deeper issue there. And I think, this one, a lot of times people don't do things because they don't have the time, but I think in this particular case, that is just a really poor excuse. That is representative of fiscal irresponsibility. And if that is an excuse that people use for not creating budgets, then one of two things needs to happen. Either there needs to be a serious conversation about changing priorities and understanding why this is a priority, or B, if you can't get through to somebody, then they've got to go, because if you can't get somebody on board to do budgeting, then there's probably a host of other issues associated with that particular person that you're better off not dealing with in the future.
Do you find in the businesses that you've worked with that maybe they are lacking a budget or lacking a proper budget, that it's a matter of they just don't really know what to do, they don't know what to have in that budget, or is it just something that they have some other type of excuse?
That is one issue, but I think that if you have been running the business for at least a year, then you at least have the foundation and a basic understanding of what you spent money on in the first year, and you've got a pretty good vision for what your needs are going to be in the second year. So you at least have the basics on which to give it a shot on your own. Even if you're no expert, you can at least try. So, to not do it because you don't know how to do it, there is some merit to it, as I mentioned previously, but I don't think that that's enough of a reason to not build a budget. It's just because you don't know how to. I mean, you can educate yourself on how to do it. You can get some help doing it, and if you've been running the business for at least a year, then you should have a feel for what your expenses have been and what they might be moving forward.
Okay, so let's get into then some of the components for a budget. So if there are some people who are having some trouble on creating this effective budget, what do you see as the most critical components to a budget?
Sure. So I look at budgets in two different buckets. One, you've got the inputs, and then secondly, you've got the outputs. And the outputs are almost always the margins, the gross margin and the gross profit margin and the net profit margin. So those are determined by our inputs. And my three inputs here, first of all, sales forecasts. It would be wise to project out or have 2 or 3 different sales forecasts. A middle of the road, an estimate that you think is reasonable to attain, and then a conservative estimate and an aggressive estimate. So then that way, if your goal is to hit your middle of the road forecast, but you miss it either high or low, then you at least have a sense of how your budget needs to change, and what sorts of adjustments need to be made in the coming months to try and get yourself back on track, or to continue to feed the business for further growth if you're already above your sales targets. Because maybe you can accelerate your growth plan a little bit if you're hitting and exceeding your sales targets. And sales forecasting is an exercise in of itself that is maybe not necessarily. I think it's more separate and distinct from budgeting. I think sales forecasting is a totally different process that you need to do. You need to be able to do your sales forecasting in order to build your budget. So my second input would be your cost of goods sold. And all we're really doing right now is moving right down the income statement. We've got our sales forecast, and now we're going to look at our cost of goods sold. Because your sales minus your cost of goods sold is your gross profit margin. So there's your first output. So you really need to have a feel for cost of goods sold, and if you've been in business for a few years, then you probably see your gross profit margins historically are relatively consistent with some variation depending on what's happening in your industry, or if you hired a bunch of people one year and just didn't have the sales numbers to justify it, then your cost of goods sold might be a little higher. But in theory, if you've got your business pretty much dialed in, then your cost of goods sold should be relatively consistent. Now, there are some things that you should be asking yourself as you're looking forward over the next year. Are there ways to get your cost of goods sold down? And you could do this through a number of different things. One, you find some new vendors that might have different cost structures of their own that allow them to sell you products and services at lower prices than the people you're currently using. The solar industry is a phenomenal example of material prices falling, because 5 years ago, people were installing solar projects in 2009 for $5 a watt, for instance, $5-6 a watt, which means, let's take a $1 million project, that would be a 200 kilowatt solar array. Today, they can install that same 200 kilowatt solar array for $2 to $3 a watt. So it's pretty much a $400,000 to $600,000 project when it used to be $1 million, and that's almost exclusively because of how far materials prices have fallen over that same period of time. So do you see that there might be some materials that you use that will benefit from some falling prices for one reason or another? And if so, we should account for that in a cost of goods sold estimate. Can you outsource some labor, or what's happening in the labor markets for you and your business? Sometimes hiring temp labor works really well because the people that you hire them from pay all their benefits, and it's all baked into an hourly rate. So, it's a little bit cleaner, and that might be less than what you're paying your own people. If there are independent consultants or contractors that would fall into the cost of goods sold line item, for instance, maybe an electrician or a plumber or an HVAC company or something like that, a subcontractor for you, then chances are you can shop those around, or they can do the work cheaper than you've been able to do it on your own in past years. So that whole concept of, do I do it myself or do I farm it out, becomes a topic of conversation for you to consider as you look forward to the next year and how to get a handle on your cost of goods sold. So there's a variety of different, those are just a few, and then, as it pertains to your business, there may be a few other creative ways to save on cost of goods sold. So that's input number 2. Input number 3 are your operating expenses, selling, general, administrative, overhead, those types of things, auto expenses, payroll taxes, insurance, rent, utilities, telephone, internet, office equipment, etc. There's a few different things here. This is where you can really start to play a little bit more. I mean, your cost of goods sold are pretty much driven by the market and what you might be able to find, but your operating expenses, you've got a little bit more control over those, at least in getting them to what you need them to be or want them to be. So, for instance, payroll is probably most folks' largest operating expense. If they have payroll, it's probably one of their largest operating expenses. So make sure that we get that dialed in pretty well for the next 12 months. There shouldn't be a whole lot of variation. Hopefully you've got figured out any folks that you might need to hire to keep the business running or grow the business over the next 12 months, and you've got that accounted for in a payroll budget. Secondly, interest is generally an operating expense. Do you have any debt on the books that you could refinance to a lower rate to get your interest expenses down? Insurance policies can be reviewed upon, when renewal dates come up. And, I just saved a client about 35% on their insurance expenses for the upcoming year just by using a new underwriter. Same broker, but new underwriter. We worked together with the broker to save some money that way. Travel, meals and expenses, this can really get out of control if there isn't some sort of formal enforced policy in place for the business. You should be setting per diems, which pretty much means how much money you'll provide to an employee to pay for meals if they're traveling on a daily basis. I've seen this be $20 a day. I've seen it be set up, we'll buy you 1 meal but not 3. This is very company specific and what you're comfortable with, but you should be setting per diems so that everybody knows that there are rules in place. For things like travel, don't fly first class. There are ways to control these expenses, and that's definitely something you should do because people love to go to expensive steakhouses and get the surf and turf and drink a bunch of whiskey or wine and then smoke cigars and fly first class. So there are things you should do to control those. Professional fees are another one. This one can change pretty substantially year to year depending on if you've had a bunch of lawyer bills the last year. I mean, you should be slotting in things, expenses for things like a CPA because you're going to need tax and accounting help. If you need financial help, you should have a CFO for, an outsourced CFO in there. But the law bills in particular can vary pretty widely year to year depending on what types of legal battles you've been fighting that year, if any. And then you obviously cannot forget about Uncle Sam. So, try to look at historical effective tax rates for the business and assign them to your projected net income and just have a placeholder there for taxes so that you're not caught by surprise. And you might be able to work with your CPA on that, but if you don't want to pay your CPA to do it, then just to have a placeholder there for taxes is a great idea. So then there are a variety of other line items that fall under operating expenses, but those are just a few in particular that I like to take a look at.
Well, I think one of the things that jumps out just by going through some of these components is just the considerable cost savings that you can get by not only creating the budget, but then reviewing it on a consistent basis. Like you mentioned, the refinancing some debt, or you mentioned the example with the insurance savings, maybe changing some vendors or exploring some other vendors that might have some cost saving. It seems like just creating the budget, of course, has big benefits, but then as you're reviewing that budget, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later about how often you should review the budget, but it can save you considerable money over time.
Absolutely. Competition is a good thing. So especially, to use the insurance example again, to shop that around is a great idea. Shop your banking relationships around for benefits that different banks might be able to provide you either through lending limits or interest rates or et cetera. That's bank shopping for a bank is another conversation entirely. That can be a little time consuming and complicated at times, but yeah, this is something that you should be reviewing pretty consistently, just because there are ways to save money that if you don't look at it after 6 months, or a year, then you start to forget about it, and you just get comfortable with the idea that you're spending money on these things. You might be profitable, your cash flow is okay, so we don't have a problem. But in reality, things could be a lot better if you paid better attention to it.
Okay, well let's just get into the reviewing the budget, and what's kind of the best time frame to review your budgets and your budget, and then is there specific areas or components that really should get the most attention?
Yeah, I think monthly is a great way to do it. You do after you close out your month. It's a good time to sit down with the management team and review sales for the past month, expenses for the last month, and do budget versus actual comparison to figure out just how the company performed for the last month. If you wanted to stretch it out to quarterly, I think that's a little more dangerous. You can get into cash flow trouble pretty quick in 3 months if something happens. So I like to do this monthly at a minimum. And I think things to review. Particularly, it starts at the top: sales figures and gross margins. If you are on target, great. Then you can maybe start to get into some of the more granular details if you want to. But I think that's first and foremost the most important thing. Are you generating the sales you need to generate, and are you delivering on those sales at the cost that you thought you were going to? Are you generating the gross margins that you thought you were going to? Because the rest of your budget is based on what you have in gross profit. So if you're hitting those two numbers, then I think you're in pretty good shape. But if there's variation there, then it's definitely time to get a little more granular and figure out what's happening.
Okay. So obviously we know that if you're not reviewing your budget, that can be a pretty big problem. But there are some other maybe overlooked areas or issues that can cause some budget problems.
Yeah, there's definitely. Cost of goods sold is certainly one of them. This can bury you quick. If you are, if you're doing a construction project and you budgeted that this project was going to cost you $1 million, and you got a contract for $1.2 million, and you're 6 months into a project that's going to take 9 or 12 months, and you're projecting already that your expenses are going to be at $1.5 or $2 million, then that's a real serious problem that needs addressing. And that's a conversation that needs to be had. Well, is it worth us to just bail out of this contract? What will be the repercussions if we back out of the contract to save ourselves from going bankrupt on this particular project? So cost of goods sold can really kill you quick. So you should always be have a good handle on what it costs you to fulfill sales orders or build a project or whatever it is that your business does. Secondly, not using payroll effectively can be a problem. So you might need the $100,000 payroll budget that you have, to use an arbitrary number, but the people that you are paying may not be getting you the best bang for the buck. So I may not argue with you that maybe it's not that you need to cut payroll, but maybe it's just that you need better people to get the results that you need for the money that you're spending. So that's it's a kind of a different way of looking at it as opposed to just looking at a line item on a P&L, profit and loss. But you should be thinking pretty or reviewing pretty consistently whether or not your employees are doing what they should be doing for what you're paying them. Okay.
Now, obviously, with creating a budget, this involves a business having to spend money. I'm kind of curious on your beliefs on the need to spend money to grow a business and compete. A lot of businesses these days are looking to cut costs. Can businesses get away with not spending these days?
Sure, they can, and it's very situation specific. And I think in more cases, that's a plan that will stunt your growth. But there's to give you an example, a business that could get away with not investing in itself. If you've got an older business owner that's just getting ready to retire, and they either are going to sell the business, so they're trying to keep their expenses down so that their margins look better, so they can sell the business for more money. That might make sense. Or secondly, if they're not going to sell the business, then they should be just siphoning cash out of that company and sticking it away in deferred comp plans or retirement plans or paying off their mortgage or getting rid of any other debt that they are guaranteeing. That would be one example where, there's a better use of cash than reinvesting it in the business. But in almost every other scenario, not investing some of that money back into the business will stunt your growth. I mean, you're going to need new people and new assets as you grow, and in particular, you're going to want expensive people. I saw a quote the other day that if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. So you're going to, you get what you pay for. You're going to want to recruit and retain top talent to grow your business. So you will need to invest there, and you'll also need to invest in new assets depending on whatever business it is that you're running. You're going to need some new equipment, and if you don't get it, then you're stunting your growth. So if you don't invest in your business, then chances are pretty good it's not going to grow. And it's just a matter of where you choose to invest those dollars that becomes the next question. And that's part of an overall strategic plan. And if you don't have a plan in place that at least has you thinking about where you need to invest in the business in the next few years, then you should probably sit down pretty soon and put together a 1, 3, 5 year plan on sales forecasts and what you'll need for resources to accomplish some of the goals that you're setting for the business, so you can start to figure that out and plan for it.
Now, before we wrap this up, I wanted to get into, maybe in case we missed something. So one final budget tip that maybe we overlooked up until this point. Any last minute thoughts to leave people with?
Yeah. So you've heard the saying that numbers don't lie, and I agree, numbers don't lie, but they do tell stories. So make sure that you're digging into every line item, even if it's small potatoes. You might be $1 million a year business with an operating expense that's $2,000 a year. But if in 2012 it was $2,000, and in 2013 it was $8,000, and in 2014 it was $30,000, then there's a story there. What's happening? Why is that cost item growing so much more rapidly than anything else? So even if it's small dollar figures, you should be calculating things like year-over-year change, and what that item is as a percentage of both total revenue and let's say it's an operating expense line item, what that item is as a percentage of total operating expenses. This way, it'll give you a better picture on how your P&L and how your cost structure is built, and where you might have red flags popping up that need to be addressed. So the numbers definitely don't lie, but there's always a story behind it. So I always suggest digging a little deeper, because oftentimes you'll be surprised at what you find.
All right. Well, as we end here, let's finish up and just kind of give some information on how people get in touch with you to get more information about budgeting or any other financial related topics.
Sure. So email is Jeff, Jeff, at eco-cfo.com. That's eco-cfo.com. And website, www.eco-cfo.com.
All right. Well, excellent. Again, Jeff is the president and CEO of EcoCFO, the only CFO for hire consulting firm dedicated to the energy and environmental industry. Jeff, appreciate all the information, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Tom.